The Pacific War, a massive, world-altering pendulum of power. Let's dive right in. 1937. Now, here in the West, it's super common to think this whole conflict kicked off in 1941, right? But the true origins? They actually trace back way earlier. By 1937, Japan was already locked into a massive, full-scale invasion of China. This set an incredibly deadly stage, long before the global escalation pulled the rest of the world into the fire. Section 1. Origins of the conflict. Let's look at this brewing geopolitical storm. You see, a stark contrast in strategies made this clash virtually inevitable. On one hand, you have Japan's Southern Plan. This was an urgent, strategic drive to seize absolutely vital resources, especially those rich oil reserves down in the Dutch's Indies. On the other hand, the Allies countered by slapping down a crippling economic embargo, aiming to completely constrain Japanese expansion. Basically, it was a totally unsustainable pressure cooker. And Japan was heavily preparing for it to burst. Take a look at this internal resource split from 1942 to 1945. The Imperial Japanese Army took a whopping 60% of the state's military budget, and the Imperial Japanese Navy commanded the other 40%. That is a massive, highly coordinated mobilization of both ground and naval forces, gearing up for an absolutely unprecedented campaign across the ocean. Section 2. Rapid Japanese Expansion. The pendulum swings outward. December 1941 showcased just stunning speed and coordination. On December 7th or the 8th, depending on your time zone, Japan unleashed a wave of simultaneous surprise attacks. The devastating strike on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii happened right alongside major assaults on the Philippines, Malaya, and Hong Kong. It was an explosive, synchronized offensive that literally shocked the world and instantly dragged the United States and Britain fully into the theater. Any momentum that followed was just overwhelming. Within the very first 6 months, vast swaths of the Asia-Pacific region fell under Japanese control. We're talking the Dutch East Indies, Burma, the Solomon Islands, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, and Guam. The sheer speed of this territorial capture gave Japan a massive defensive perimeter almost overnight. It fundamentally altered the map. Section 3. The tides turn. The Japanese offensive pendulum finally stalls. So mid-1942 rolls around, and it marks a massive shift in momentum. These few months were absolute chaos, but they were the definitive turning point. In May, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, Allied forces successfully forced a Japanese invasion force headed for Port Moresby to retreat. Then, just a month later in June, the monumental Battle of Midway completely shattered the Japanese fleet. By August, the grueling Guadalcanal campaign kicked off, officially marking the start of major Allied offensives. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly is Midway considered the big turning point? Well, at Midway, Japan suffered absolutely devastating losses to its aircraft carrier fleet. They lost ships and highly trained pilots that they simply could not replace fast enough. Meanwhile, on the flip side, United States industrial output was surging, turning out ever-increasing numbers of ships and aircraft. Japan just couldn't keep up with that kind of relentless industrial production. Section 4. The Allied Counteroffensive. The methodical pushback across the ocean. The Allied doctrine of island hopping, sometimes called leapfrogging, was honestly brilliant. Instead of trying to engage every single Japanese stronghold head-on, which would have been a bloodbath, Allied forces strategically bypassed the most heavily fortified positions. They selectively seized important, less defended islands to build forward bases and airfields. This effectively left massive Japanese garrisons completely stranded, totally cut off from their supply lines as the Allies relentlessly advanced toward Japan. And check out this crazy statistic. Just 2%. United States submarines made up less than 2% of the entire US Navy, yet this tiny fraction of the force completely strangled Japanese commercial shipping, they intercepted troop transports, and choked off nearly all vital oil imports, which, remember, were absolutely essential to Japan's weapons production and military operations. It was incredibly effective asymmetric warfare that brought the Japanese war machine to an absolute crawl. Section 5. Final Stages and Surrender. Moving the timeline into the harrowing final years of the conflict. By late 1944 and early 1945, things got incredibly fierce as the Allies really closed in on the Japanese home islands. We see this massive naval engagement at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. That's followed by the grueling, just incredibly bloody ground assaults on Iwo Jima in February 1945 and Okinawa in April.
It's also during this desperate phase, with their naval options rapidly dwindling, that Japanese forces introduced organized kamikaze attacks, really showcasing the extreme measures taken as their defensive perimeter collapsed. Then comes August 1945, bringing a stark, rapid succession of events that decisively closed the largest theater of World War II. On August 6th, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. On August 9th, Nagasaki was bombed, and simultaneously, the Soviet Union entered the theater by invading Manchuria. Faced with this overwhelming multi-front reality, Japan announced its unconditional surrender on August 15th.
Section 6. The human cost. Let's pause the timeline to objectively look at the staggering human toll of this conflict. I mean, just let the sheer magnitude of these numbers speak for themselves. In China, you have over 3.8 million military casualties, alongside an unimaginable 12 million civilian deaths. In Japan, over 2.1 million military and 460,000 civilian deaths. The US lost roughly 161,000 military personnel, and down in the Dutch East Indies, roughly 4 million civilian casualties. The scale of devastation across this entire region is just deeply, deeply sobering. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really think about. How did the violent shifting of these borders, combined with this staggering human cost, permanently redefine the geopolitics of the modern Asia-Pacific? Because the complex, heavily fortified, and rapidly evolving global landscape we live in today is quite literally forged in the fires of this exact conflict. Thanks for joining me today. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.